Welcome to another speaker series event brought to you by the Cultural Knowledge Consortium. The CKC is a joint interagency effort of the U.S. government to support the development of sociocultural knowledge and facilitate knowledge exchange across a range of sociocultural communities of interest. Contact information, the CKC blog, discussion forums, and other resources are available on the CKC web portal at ckc.army.mil. You will also find a link to recordings of all speaker series presentations on the CKC YouTube channel. You may submit questions using the chat, question and answer pod in the lower portion of your screen at any time. We'll respond to as many as time allows. Content of this presentation should not be construed as advocacy, nor representing the views of the CKC or the U.S. government. This presentation is unclassified and intended for public release. Enjoy this presentation.
Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on where you are. This is Jay Hunt, CKC Operations. I'd like to welcome you to another speaker series event brought to you by the Cultural Knowledge Consortium. Today, our guest is Mr. Joseph Fallon. And Mr. Fallon comes to us as a consultant and cultural intelligence analyst for Saber Teams LLC, where he provides analysis of extremist groups in both Africa and Asia. He's also an Army certified instructor with accreditation in basic and advanced intelligence analysis and counterintelligence familiarization courses. He's actually a former instructor at the U.S. Army Intelligence Center at Fort Huachuca in that beautiful place out in there in Sierra Vista. Today he is going to be, this is actually a follow-up topic for a previous speaker series event that he did. It's focusing on Afghanistan, and this one specifically targets in on Afghanistan and within the prism of geopolitics. And without any further ado, I'd like to welcome again Mr. Joseph Fallon and turn the presentation over to him. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. First, I wish to express my thanks to the Cultural Knowledge Consortium for inviting me to present this lecture today. And second, I wish to thank you for your interest in attending, and I look forward to your participation. The title is Afghanistan Within the Prism of Geopolitics, and it will be divided into three parts. First, a discussion of the theory and practice of geopolitics. Second, discuss the importance of Afghanistan to U.S. geopolitical objectives. And third, discuss the importance of Afghanistan to the geopolitical objectives of neighboring countries of Afghanistan: Iran, Russia, Pakistan, India, and China. So, geopolitics has been defined as the study of geographic influences on power relationships in international politics. Geopolitical theorists have sought to demonstrate the importance in the determination of foreign policies of considerations such as the acquisition of natural boundaries, access to important sea routes, and control of strategically important land areas. The founding father of geopolitics and geostrategy was Sir Halford John Mackinder, an English geographer and academic. Now, in 1904, he delivered a paper to the Royal Geographical Society entitled Geographical Pivot of History, in which he formulated the Heartland theory. The Heartland theory is the control of Eurasia. In 1919, in the peace settlement after World War I, he introduced his work, Democratic Ideas and Reality, studying the politics of Reconstruction, urging the Paris Peace Conference to take into consideration geographical factors. And his maxim is, in this publication, was, who rules East Europe commands the heartland. Who rules the heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island controls the world. The world island consists of Eurasia and Africa. Now, there was a corollary to that. This is his map of just the geographics. The land power, as you can see, the heartland, is Russia. Russia under the Empire and under the Soviets. Now, he said that there was a second condition, and that is the actual balance of political power at any given time is, of course, the product, on the one hand, of geographical conditions, both economic and strategic, and on the other, of the relative number, virility, equipment, organization of the competing peoples. And he was motivated by the great game in Central Asia between the British and Russian empires, as the British moved up from southern India into northern India and present-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the Russians moved down from Siberia into what were the former Soviet republics, and both vying for influence over Iran. Now, in the Cold War, began 6 months after Germany surrendered, and began in the Middle East. It began in Iran. The Soviet Union supported two separatist movements in pro-West Iran, short-lived Kurdish and Azerbaijani republics. Moscow's gambit failed, but that was the first incident of others that culminated in the Berlin crisis of 1948, leading the U.S. under Truman administration to adopt as its foreign policy containment of the power and influence of the Soviet Union. And geopolitics was a foundation for this policy. Now, there were two architects. The principal architect is George F. Kennan, in his famous 1947 article in Foreign Affairs called the X article, in which he mentioned we were in a new war, a Cold War, and Soviet behavior was such that the U.S. response had to be to try to contain it. Now, the U.S. position, as it unfolded, was a slight variation of Mackinder's theory of the Heartland. The Soviets already had East Europe, and they had much of the Heartland. So the goal for the U.S. in containment was to prevent it from expanding any further, and through economic attrition, bring the empire down. Now, the second architect, he elaborated on Kennan's work, was Kennan's successor, Paul Nitze, as director of the policy planning staff in National Security Council Memorandum 68. He expanded the containment scope beyond what Kennan had advocated, the defense of major centers of industrial power, to encompass the entire world. In the context of the present polarization of power, it read, a defeat of the free world anywhere is a defeat everywhere. So we had containment embodied in three organizations that the U.S. helped found, NATO, CENTO, and CETO. Now, NATO in the dark blue, Canada, the United States, and then Western Europe. So you had containment of the North and the West, the Soviets. Then you had CENTO, also called the Baghdad Pact. Now, Turkey was in both. In CENTO, Central Treaty Organization also, it's Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Pakistan. But after the monarchy was overthrown in Baghdad by Arab nationalists in 1958, I believe, it became kind of morbid, not too much teeth to it, but again, the idea is to have a containment along the southern shore, and the southern borderland, excuse me. And then with CETO, Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, as some of the members, with Australia, the United States, Britain, and France, it's more of a containment of the growing influence of China. But again, it's the idea of politics. Mackinder's theory is going to be accepted but modified. If they did have this control of the Eurasian map, they could have a great deal more power over the world. So you had these containment or sanitary cordons established. Now, when the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, theoreticians of the U.S. on geopolitics, there were two principals, Samuel Philip Huntington, two principles I wish to mention. Samuel Philip Huntington, which talked about the ideological age essentially morphing, if you will, into a clash of civilizations. The more important, in my opinion, is Dr. Brzezinski, who wrote in 1998 the Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and its Geostrategic Imperatives. And this would, his work and his explanation would greatly refine and advance the idea of geopolitics for the post-Cold War world for U.S. policy. Now, with the breakup of the Soviets, here is McAnder's Heartland, another view in which you can see Central Asia and Afghanistan included. For the U.S., once you had contained the Soviets and now the empire had broken up, it was important to get this key area, which was strategically important between East and West, specifically for its oil, gas resources and the pipelines. And Afghanistan would be a gateway, if you will, to Central Asia. And the idea, if you can control Central Asia, you could assure U.S. Is not confronted with rivals. Now, in 1992, the Pentagon stated the objective quite clearly. It said, our first objective is to prevent the reemergence of a rival that poses a threat on the territory of the former Soviet Union. This is a dominant consideration and requires that we endeavor to prevent any hostile power from dominating a region whose resources would, under consolidated control, be sufficient to generate global power. Our strategy must now refocus on precluding the emergence of any potential future global competitor. In his book in 1998, Dr. Brzezinski clarified and expanded the reasons why. He writes, how America manages Eurasia is critical. A power that dominates Eurasia would control two of the world's three most advanced and economically productive regions. A mere glance at the map also suggests that control over Eurasia would almost automatically entail Africa's subordination, rendering the Western Hemisphere and Oceania geopolitically peripheral to the world's central continent. About 75% of the world's people live in Eurasia. Most of the world's physical wealth is there as well, both in its enterprise and underneath its soil. Eurasia accounts for about 3/4 of the world's known energy resources. When the U.S. invaded Afghanistan and overthrew the Taliban as the government, it required supplying the troops in Afghanistan, and this was done in two ways. The first, logistically, was to have air and land routes to bring in supplies to the troops, U.S. and Allied, and this was relying greatly on Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. Then there needed to be hubs, logistic hubs for coordination. And the U.S. in the early year 2002 had established or rented bases in all 5 countries. It was official with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and it was unofficial. Turkmenistan offered its bases, but unofficially and only as humanitarian aid. But the U.S. was able to have a footprint now in Central Asia by its need to support the troops in Afghanistan. Now, you had, in 2002, the testimony of then Secretary of State Colin Powell, who, referring to these developments, stated the United States will remain interested in the long-term security and stability of the region. And that was the whole Central Asia, Afghanistan region to which he referred. Now, this map that you see is called a polar azimuthal equidistant projection. It's the type of map you see depicted on the flag of the United Nations. But it really brings to life Mackinder's theory of Eurasia, Africa being a world island. And here, for Eurasian competitors of energy resources, you see that right here within Central Asia, here in Afghanistan, you have the energy resources of Central Asia, of the Caspian Sea, of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iran. And it's in the center of this world island. And if you can control, have influence, let's say, over the pipelines in former Soviet Central Asia, then you can weaken power or prevent the emergence of Russia and China as hegemons. You deprive them of the energy resources needed for development, Development gives them the finances to modernize and expand their military, as well as the means to engage in dollar diplomacy if need be. It weakens them if you can have the control. And that's what we'll get to in a second. This next map, again, the same projection, shows you, again, the centrality of Central Asia and Afghanistan. It is in the center of the Islamic extremist activities, not only in Afghanistan, but in Pakistan and India. And the concern they have of the Islamic movements, the fundamentalists, or rather extremists, in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and as well as being close to the ongoing troubles in Yemen and Somalia. So it is a key location from which to project power, close at hand to the immediate vicinity, Central Asia and Afghanistan, and to assist with projecting it in combating the other extremist areas in that locality of the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa. Now, the U.S. position, or the U.S. goals, geopolitical goals, in Afghanistan can be listed as principally 5. First and foremost, defeat of terrorism, Al-Qaeda, Taliban. Second, suppress opium production. That's a major source of funding for terrorism. 3, to have access to the region's natural resources. This would enable the country of Afghanistan to be able to develop, and it enables the allies of the U.S. to have access to resources for their own development as well. You also want to have access to prevent the rise of regional hegemons, like I said, Russia or China, and to contain Iran. So if we just look at the next series of maps, with the U.S. in Afghanistan, dealing with the Taliban and dealing with the affiliated Taliban Pakistan, or claiming affiliated, they're united just by their extremism and their anti-Americanism. The U.S. is dead center, but what this map shows is the transnational links from Saudi Arabia to Yemen to Somalia, from the Somali extremists that went into Pakistan, the attacks in India, like on Mumbai, and all the way into Indonesia and into the Philippines. Now, every incident has its own specific features, its own origin. It's not a cookie template. Each one is distinct. The thing is that with the mass media and the narrative, social media, and the narrative of Islamic extremists, Al-Qaeda, for instance, encourages the volunteers to these regions, further destabilizing them. We see that with the volunteers that went into Somalia, went to Iraq, and now into Syria, volunteers for Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda affiliates. Now, the U.S. is in a position to break the important link of Afghanistan, Pakistan, the extremists there. The second is their financing. Now, the Golden Crescent is Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran. Afghanistan alone, of all the rivals, the Golden Triangle in Burma and Thailand, Laos, Afghanistan alone produces over 90% of the world's non-pharmaceutical grade opium. And Afghanistan is the world's largest producer of hashish. This is just a slide of an opium field. It's a rugged plant. Farmers can grow it and make more money than they can in areas that have been damaged by the war, where there's not proper irrigation, where it's an investment to grow what they were famous for, pomegranates and fruits and melons. This is a sturdy crop that gives a ready income. Now, in the last 3 years, the production of opium has risen, and it's in the southwest, Farah, Kandahar, but Helmand is the most important. Helmand rivals Burma as a producer of, in quantity, of opium. Now this map is just to show you, here's Afghanistan, and the red line is the border of the Taliban. That the black circle, or elongated line here, is the Pakistani or anti-Pakistan Taliban, and the orange here are those that are thought to be affiliated with Al-Qaeda. But the purpose of the map is to show you that the distribution is within, the growing is within the Taliban region, and these blue little hash marks all around. The Taliban isn't a monolithic. There are members that claim to the Taliban that don't recognize the leadership of Mullah Omar. And there are others that are engaged in using the title for criminal activities, whether it's to supply terrorist activities or political activity by raising, distributing money from drug smuggling, or whether that is the end in itself. These little hash marks show you the porous borders with Iran and Pakistan through which drugs are smuggled. There's also here Tajikistan and Uzbekistan some. But they also indicate the fragmentation of the Taliban. They only united in their opposition to the American forces to a degree, because as you can see, their different sponsors have emerged, breaking the Taliban off. And we'll get to that in a second. But here it's just to see that the growth is in the Taliban region, and the Taliban itself has fragmented to a degree, and part is simply narco-terrorism. Now Afghanistan, for the third objective of the U.S., the accessing natural resources, Afghanistan in this map is the first country whose surface minerals have been mapped from the sky. The US Geological Survey mapped 70% of the country using what's called hyperspectral imaging, producing a mineral map. And the results are that Afghanistan is known to have vast resources of oil, gas, copper, cobalt, gold, and lithium. It may have more than $1 trillion worth of untapped mineral deposits. And this is one of the more strategic and important items. The Kenoshin carbonatite in Helmand province contains 1 million metric tons of rare earth metals. Now, the importance of rare earth metals is they're the basis for modern technology necessary for manufacturing, just to name a few items: cell phones, laptops, compact discs, flat screen display monitors, rechargeable batteries, catalytic converters, electric hybrid cards, and solar panels. China is estimated to possess the largest reserve of these metals and controls, according to the Wall Street Journal Foreign Policy, between 95 and 97% of the world's supply. Now, it's estimated that Afghanistan, through these map making, has the 6th largest supply, largest reserve of rare earth metals. With this, Afghanistan's alternative source, the U.S. and the rest of the industrialized world would be less dependent on China. It would strengthen the geopolitical position of Washington while simultaneously weakening that of Beijing. Now, the next two slides show you the mineral deposits. Just to break down, the blue are oil and gas, and the rare earths are coming here. And I want to concentrate on this eastern section of the country, diagonally from the northeast to the southwest. That is a depiction of the location of major mineral deposits, oil and gas reserves. This is the rare earths location in the blue and in the yellow. Again, it's on the eastern portion of the country. Now, this is the country that is controlled by, most of it, by the Taliban. So for the United States, here's a map, and I want to concentrate on spheres of influence, as it's called, the U.S. This area where the U.S. is battling the Taliban. Should the Taliban be defeated relatively quickly, then the U.S. could have the opportunity with allies to develop the rare earths and to develop the mineral deposits in this region. This would, as I said earlier, help the development of Afghanistan, giving it resources, revenues from those resources, and free the U.S. and its allies from dependency currently on China for the rare earths. Now, the of doing this, of achieving this, one of the thoughts was to provide alternate pipelines. Now, the pipelines in Central Asia are the remnants of the Soviet Union, and they are owned by Russia. And Russia derives significant revenues from them. And Europe is dependent upon supplies through them. Now, it had been argued that on a practical level, economic efficiency, reliability of product, to come up with alternative routes. So there's a route from Turkmenistan into Pakistan, Afghanistan and Pakistan, called the TAP pipeline. Another proposal actually extends it to India, and it's called TAPI. And then this particular proposal has not got off the ground yet. It's not been realized. But it would divert the sources away from Russia and to these new lines, making them more independent rather, from Russia, and depriving Russia of revenues. Now, the one that was created was from Baku, Azerbaijan, Tbilisi, Georgia, to Ceyhan, Turkey, this light blue here. And it was from Turkey to go into Europe. Again, it was to be an alternative source, providing reliable supplies because of the disputes that Russia had had over the years with countries like Poland or Ukraine over transit rights. It's active, it was constructed, but it has not lived up as of now to its expectations. But the whole purpose of alternatives, aside of the practical need, there's also the political need of ensuring that Russia doesn't have the means to become a regional power. It doesn't have the financial means to improve its military, diversify its economy, weaken it to some degree. And the same goes with China. China has a fast-growing economy, and one way of controlling that is to control access to the oil resources from Central Asia. And another way is the old containment policy. Now, what has happened is that the U.S. has expanded the original Cold War alliance, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, also including Australia. And now, as a containment of China, concern over disputes, for instance, the Spratly Islands, the dispute over oil here in the various countries, especially Vietnam, disputing China's claim. So Vietnam is a natural associate in trying to contain the expansion of China. But the crown jewel is India. Its size, population, territorial, economic. It is to be presented as an alternative model for the rest of Asia to the Chinese model. And it is also to be a counterpoint or counterbase to China to try to contain China's influence, have an alternative source that the countries can turn to. Now, the pink are those that are considered firm in this tentative alliance as of now, and the reds, the ones that the U.S. is hoping will join. But the linchpin is India. Now, the third country is Iran. And here, again, it's a containment policy. You have the Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. You have the Fifth Fleet station there. They have the ability to put in sanctions and close Hormuz itself, the Strait of Hormuz. You have the military bases, alliances with Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. These principally. And you also have the U.S. supporting the naval forces of Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan. This actually serves two purposes. It is a way of containing Iran's claims to the Caspian Sea and also Russia's claims as well. Now, those are the three objectives. Through the pipelines, to control Russia and prevent it from reemerging as a serious power and influence that could disrupt Americans' interest or projection of power. China, also pipelines controlling for that, but also this alliance of containment, and with Iran, again, containment. And we'll go how they have responded in kind. But first, the Great Game. The Great Game refers to the 100-year rivalry between the British and the Russian empires for dominance in Central Asia, particularly Afghanistan and Iran. Arthur Conley, as intelligence officer for the British East India Company, he first coined the term, and it was popularized by Roger Kipling in his novel Kim. And it was just about the rivalry for power, and this is the map. The British came up from the south of India, moved northwards, and as I said, the Russians came from Siberia south. And the prizes eventually became Iran and Afghanistan between these two rivals. Now, after the fall of the Cold War and after the invasion of Iran, and with the discovery from the mineral map of the riches of natural resources, and with the location of Afghanistan to Central Asia and its pipelines, a new great game emerged. The term emerged and applies to the scramble among major and regional powers for geopolitical objectives in Afghanistan, Central Asia, and Trans-Caucasus. These objectives include political influence, strategic positioning, with or without a military presence, and economic profits. The countries competing with the U.S. are Russia, China, Iran, India, and Pakistan. Now, on this map, we can see the effect and the importance of Central Asia. The circles here, Western Europe, Central India, Eastern China, Korea, Japan. These are the major concentrations of industrial production. You can see that the blue, the Central Asia area, is almost equidistant between them, and it is adjacent to the principal energy resources on the continent, the Caspian, the Persian Gulf, so that include Azerbaijan, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Now, how each country responds. First and foremost, they're concerned about their territorial integrity, make sure that they're not further broken up, in case of Pakistan or Russia, and the prevention, the security of their borders from terrorism or narco-terrorism or any type of armed conflict, that there is a security to their borders. Now, this map shows you that, yes, there are the major mountains, the Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau, Tian Shan, and Pamirs, but a lot of Eurasia is flat land. Even the deserts can be crossed by armies. And this is the historical impact, what motivates these countries. You have in the 13th century Genghis Khan coming out of the desert, conquering China, conquering Iran, and conquering Russia. In the 14th century, from Central Asia, you have Timur, who claimed to be a descendant of Genghis Khan. And from his capital in Samarkand, he's able easily to invade Iran and invade Russia. And he burnt Moscow down at least once, if not twice. It also works for Pakistan and India. Geography is there that allows for an invasion from Central Asia, Afghan region. Here, from Kabul in Afghanistan, Babur invaded India, and he was the father of the Mughal Empire, which lasted a few centuries, one of the greatest cultural achievements of the world. Now, for Iran, again, preserving the Republic, the Islamic Republic, preserving Iran, territorial integrity, countering U.S. influence, assuring friendly governments on its eastern front in Afghanistan, Kabul and Herat, and to have access to the natural resources of Central Asia. Now, we went over how the U.S. has the containment with Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and then Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, which it has provided defensive weapons for, and its positioning of the Fifth Fleet. How has Iran reacted? Now, Iran is hurting severely through the sanctions, but it does have some options, and that's just what I want to mention. The options are religious, cultural, and energy. Now, it has a reliance with Iraq, or an understanding, I think is a fair word, with the Iraqi government. It's a Shia-led government. So it's not a strong container of Iran as the U.S. had hoped. In Afghanistan, Herat in the east used to be part of Iran. It is Pushtun, but it is bilingual. They speak Dari, and Dari is just another name for Persian. And it has good relations with Ismail Khan, the governor, former warlord. And its interest is also in both strategic for minerals and also for co-religionists. The Shiite in Afghanistan, the third largest group, called the Hazaras. So religion, Afghanistan, the Hazaras, and Iraq, the Arab Shias. Also, there's been a rebellion going on in eastern Saudi Arabia, the oil-rich eastern province, by the Shias. It's low level, but it's happened before. This gives an advantage to Iran, potentially. It has a source of undermining the effectiveness of the defense shield that Saudi Arabia is trying to deploy, because it has its own rear that's exposed with Shiites that have been discriminated in the past and are in a state of semi-rebellion now. You also have Iran's influence with, pardon me, the Shias of Bahrain, which also is the port of call, the home port for the Fifth Fleet in the Persian Gulf. Now, energy-wise, Iran is proposing for years. The U.S. opposes it, but it's a pipeline to Pakistan and to India. So it is courting those two giants, Pakistan and India, kind of undermining the U.S. position to some degree by offering access to its oil reserves more efficiently, more directly than what is currently done, and also into Turkey. So it's playing those cards, the religious card, the cultural card with Herat, and then the energy card with its neighbors. Now, if we can go back to this map, what I'd like to show you is its concern about the eastern frontier. The U.S. had, under the Bush administration, had been sympathetic to ethnic secessionist movements in Iran. And it has been accused of supporting and arming a group called Jandala, which is a Baluchi independence movement, which is in the south. Pakistan, largest province is Baluch, and it's also a corresponding province of Iran. In order to defend its eastern borders from terrorists as well as narco-traffickers or supporters of secessionist movements, if you can make out all where these blues are, which are the drug Taliban, there's almost tit for tat an orange stroke going all along this eastern border. And those are Taliban that are sponsored by Iran, or alleged to be sponsored by Iran. So Iran is having its own local force, if you will, in that area to protect its interests. This comes back to this other map, and look at the extent of Iranian influence that has been projected by the global security. We have Herat, and we have the Shia, Hazara, all within a sphere of influence by Iran. It also includes mineral deposits, also includes oil deposits. So it is protecting its left flank through its sponsoring of rival Talibans to the drug cartels, and it has increased its influence eastward into what culturally and religiously is home ground. So with a weak hand, it's playing as good a game as it can in trying to counter the effect of sanctions and containment. Now for Russia. Russia asserts that Central Asia, Ukraine, Transcaucasia, they're its backyard, and it's termed these regions the near abroad. And it has been building alliances with Iran and China to stabilize the situation there. None of them are interested in Islamic fundamentalism. Iran is Shia, so it's not interested in Sunni fundamentalism. And Russia and China both have concerns of Muslim insurgencies, Russia in Chechnya, and China in Uiguria, or Xinjiang, Western China. Russia is also, of course, interested to defeat the terrorism in Afghanistan because they can provide psychological boost to the terrorism they're confronting and aid to the terrorism they're confronting. And again, stopping the financing, which is the source of production, and also gaining access to the natural resources. Just engage in a rivalry with other countries and other companies for exploitation and exploration. Now, Russia's concern is to have a secure border because of the past invasions. And that secure border goes from the Caucasus Mountains, historically the Russian Empire, then the Soviet Union, the Caucasus Mountains, the southern shore of the Caspian Sea. You go to the Pamirs and the Tian Shan in the east with Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. There's an area in Uzbekistan which is open and is a potential threat, but if they can ensure what this this paragraph states, they are and have been able to defend themselves from outside aggression. So it comes down to the Caucasus, the Tian Shan, and the Caspian as a line of defense. And they're trying to reassert that now in Afghanistan. One of the problems that Russia is confronting on a scale far more severe than other countries is the effects of drug trafficking. As you can see on this map, the major source is coming from Afghanistan and going through Central Asia. So they need control, in their opinion, of Central Asia, some influence to try to stop the distribution from Afghanistan in. Both are interconnected to have influence over Afghanistan and the Central Asian republics, if for no other reason than to curtail the drug trafficking. So you see that there's an estimated 2 to 2.5 million drug addicts in Russia, aged between 18 and 39. Russia consumes over 20% of all the heroin produced worldwide. The heroin Afghan heroin accounts for 90% of the Russian narcotic market. That some 30,000 to 40,000 Russians die annually of a drug overdose, and another 70,000 die from drug-related causes. So there is an important component, a health component, security component, intertwined for Russia in its interest in this region. Going back to this map, look at what the Russians have. Look at, if you can make out the green dots, and all along the borders of the former Soviet republics, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, they have supported, the Russians, their own groups of Taliban, giving a presence there and a force to counter the terrorists and the narco-terrorists that you have in the blue. But how this pans out is that they're able to have this sphere of influence in the north of the country. Along the borders, rivaling the terrorists and the narco-terrorists, they have their own Taliban groups that they support. But it is this whole area that is linguistically and ethnically tied to the former Soviet republics that Russia is seeking and gaining influence over. This will also allow her access to the Pamirs which would give her at least a part of the foothold that she needs for the Pamirs, the Tian Shan Mountains, for a security zone, secure border in the east of the country. Now, in the Grand Chessboard, Dr. Brzezinski has written, the momentum of Asia's economic development is already generating massive pressures for the exploration, exploitation, new sources of energy. The Central Asia region and the Caspian Sea basin are known to contain reserves of natural gas and oil that dwarf those of Kuwait, the Gulf of Mexico, or the North Sea. Now, these were some of the proposed routes. Another map, just similar to the one that I had shown earlier, the Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan oil pipeline that's in effect, but not too effective, or at least not living up to the initial expectation. And these rival pipelines away from the Russian source. So how does Russia respond to the proposals? And they have their own. They have either planned or underway expansion of pipelines from Russian territory into China. You can see here the proposals into Manchuria, into North China, also supporting Kazakhstan's direct route here from the west to the east coast of China. But it's also coming up with proposals to have pipelines to Japan as well. So this would have happened anyway. It needed to diversify, but the assumption by some that by alternate sources, alternate pipeline sources in Central Asia would perhaps significantly reduce the ability of Russia to reemerge, because she wouldn't have the financing that she needs for diversification, modernization of the military, first and foremost, and her economy. These pipelines show that she does have that ability to bring in, by bringing pipelines to two of the most energy countries that require a great deal of energy and are thirsty for it. So they have anxious customers. And this kind of puts into check Central Asia, the attempt to change the pipelines away from them. But that's Central Asia. There is also Europe. And what's going on with Europe is the crisis of the euro, the high unemployment, the southern blocs, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece having financial difficulties, and how to be supported by the northern tier. But what's going on, and not being paid too much attention by most, is something that could really change the geopolitics of Europe and the nature of the European Union, perhaps even making NATO redundant. And that is, you have what's called Eurussia. You have an alignment taking place between Germany and Russia. First, you have the direct pipeline coming from Russia into Germany, Nord Stream, bypassing Ukraine or Poland, where there had been disputes over transit rights and revenues. So it's direct. You're also having from Russia the southern route that goes into Bulgaria, and then to Italy, and then up into Hungary, Austria. But with this German route, what's so important is that they complement each other, their economies, their demography. So Russia has the labor, Germany has the capital. Russia has the resources, Germany has the technology for extracting them efficiently. So what is unique is that there has not been significant opposition. It could be the domestic issues, it could be the crisis of the euro, but as of now, France and Italy, that Western front for Germany, is accepting it. Another picture is, and more easily to view, you have the link between Germany and Russia, but you can see that in the red, if we forget about the prophesizing of the enlargement of the Russian Federation or the Russian Union, and just look at who more or less, is on board at this time. It could change. But there's no significant opposition to this Euro-Russia and the pipeline, which will make it a true marriage in many ways, except Poland, the Baltic states, and Romania, and Sweden, and the British. But on the mainland, who have most need for a dependable source of oil and gas, there's an acceptance of this for now. So Russia, at this point, has kind of checked the ideas that it could be weakened significantly by redirecting the pipelines away from Russia and giving alternative sources that would be under local control or European or American control. That hasn't succeeded as was hoped, and more importantly, Russia has proceeded both to the east in Asia and to the west in Europe with these pipelines proposals that are giving it both geopolitical significance in both regions and a great impact on Europe, which means countering Indian influence and ensuring a friendly government in Afghanistan. So here's a map of Pakistan, and it is concerned about separatists in Balochistan in Northwest Frontier Province. It is supporting Kashmir and the right of the Kashmiris to have a plebiscite, which the UN recommended in the 60s. But this is also causing problems with India. There was an idea that Pakistan has a concern that it would be in a vice if there's a pro-Indian government in Kabul. Here we see within Afghanistan that the US actually asked the Indians to prune down its consulates in Jalalabad because Jalalabad and Kandahar were being accused of fermenting the insurgencies in Northwest Frontier Province and Balochistan. That India, sort of like tit for tat, the Pakistanis are supporting Kashmiris, so India has now been accused of supporting Baloch and Pashtuns seeking independence from Pakistan. And here are a map of their consulates. They have it in Mazar-e-Sharif and Herat as well, but it's Kandahar and Jalalabad. They're the most important. The Durand Line is another aspect that concerns Pakistan. This is Afghan territory in 1893, was surrendered to the British India, and it includes Balochistan and the Northwest Frontier Territory. It is a great concern and a live issue. No government in Afghanistan, not the king, not the Republican president, not the communists, not the Taliban, have recognized the line. They claim that the 1947 referendum did not satisfy the requirement for self-determination because a substantial part of the Pashtuns boycotted, and the referendum was a unilateral step taken without Afghan consideration or consultation, and also that they were only offered the choice of being either India or Pakistan, not being not given a grant of an option of choosing Afghanistan. This came up last year. Mark Roseman, U.S. Special Envoy, on arrival in Kabul, told the local TV station the U.S. considers the Durand Line international border. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs responded. The line was historic importance of the Afghan people, and therefore rejects and considers irrelevant any statement by anyone about the legal status. And then this year, in May 6th, President Karzai stated, since the Durand Line has been imposed on Afghanistan, it was not acceptable to the Afghans, we cannot accept the line. So the U.S. is in a bind with two allies. For Pakistan, however, Pakistan is worried about reliability of the U.S. in supporting the Durand Line, and one of the reasons is this map. This is from June 2006 issue of the Armed Forces Journal by Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters in an article, Blood Borders, and he proposed redrawing the maps of the Middle East, Greater Middle East, to reflect ethno-religious linguistic lines. Let's get a closer look. Here's what Pakistan looks like today. But his proposal is basically taking back all the land lost from by the Doron Line, Baluchistan, Northwest Frontier Province. The only difference is he doesn't put Baluchistan with Afghanistan, gives it a separate statehood. This, about a year, 18 months later, this map made the rounds in Islamabad in the parliament, and there were individuals that were making statements that they believe this was actually U.S. policy to fragment Pakistan. So it's hypersensitive about its territorial integrity, and worried that a pro-government Indian government in Afghanistan would just put it, as I said, in a vise. Now, how does India respond? India is becoming a major power, and here's the Telegraph of India showing how wide its projection is. It's involved in oil exploration off the coast of Russia, off the coast of Vietnam. It's involved in rescue works and operations by its Navy in Lebanon and in Libya. It's a growing power, and it is trying to project its influence, believing that the Indian Ocean in particular is its sphere of influence. Now, with Afghanistan and the treasures there, you've had the two principal being China and India. First, you had China, 2007, win a 30-year lease for the INEC copper mine to China, the biggest foreign investment and private business venture in Afghan history. It is building a road to connect physically Xinjiang province to Afghanistan. So the Chinese will actually have the ability to travel by land into Afghanistan. Now, this would be preempting India, the potential. Now, India won a contract for mining some of the country's large stores of iron in central India. Later that year of 2011, China won the concession for oil exploration, development of 3 oil fields in the north of the country. So the rivalry takes place in both the economic need of both for economic development and revenues by exploring and exploiting the natural resources of Afghanistan, and in their geopolitical significance, who has influence. So here we see in the red is India's influence and China's countering it, especially in Bangladesh and Burma. Now, India has a base in Tajikistan, Farkhor, and it's from this base where it can, and this is its embassy, Dushanbe, monitor both Afghanistan and China, and have a presence in Central Asia, which in 2003, the then government of India had said its interests were in building up a presence, economic development ties with Central Asia republics. There is also this tense relationship with Pakistan because of the economic need for both, for good supply, reliable supply, direct supply of gas and oil. So India's geopolitics is tempered with Pakistan by the need to work on the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, and also on the Iranian-Pakistan, India pipeline. The economic benefits to Pakistan and India for both outweigh their disputes at the present time. It could change. Now, China, it's the final participant in the new great game, and it seeks to maintain stability, which is also to prevent terrorism, to ensure access to the regional oil supply, to preserve the territorial integrity of Pakistan, to work with Russia to counter U.S. influence, to counter Indian influence, and to ensure the security of Western China, Xinjiang. Now, with regard to the oil, the attempt to have a potential of restricting China's growth by restricting its access to the Central Asian pipelines as of now has not been achieved. You have the development, as we showed later, the Kazakh and independent Russian lines, which will feed her oil thirst and her needs of her industries. But there's also the water. She gets oil by the routes going through from the Strait of Hormuz, the Indian Ocean, through the Strait of Malacca up. But to defend that, she has created in the black what's called a string of pearls. These are naval bases. So if we go back to the US policy of containment, the position of controlling the oil hasn't worked out as anticipated. But now if we look at the idea of having India as the alternative model and as the counterpoint in China, to China in Asia, something has happened. The India string of pearls consists of these bases, starting from Gwandar, Pakistan, you go to the Maldives, you go to Sri Lanka, you go to Bangladesh, to Burma, to the islands off of Burma and off of Thailand. You also have roads being built connecting South China with Burma and Burma with Bangladesh, as well as the road to Afghanistan and the proposed road to Pakistan, through Pakistan, for Ganwar port. If you look at this, India is surrounded. By land and by sea, India is checkmated. It has options, but right now it seemed that the Chinese, not anticipating war, but just taking precautions, has followed Sun Tzu's advice. The best war is the one that you win without fighting. You have your forces deployed in such a way that should war erupt, the other side knows you will win. So in this case, of the three goals, foreign policy, Iran and sanctions is working in that it's weakening Iran, and Iran is trying to make do with these alternative bilateral relations based on those issues that I said: religion, culture, and energy needs. But the two that have been the most successful of not being limited by US objectives in Central Asia have been Russia and China. So, in conclusion, geography is just one determinant of foreign policy. It can fashion prizes of strategic importance anywhere on the globe, or it can prevent insurmountable obstacles that restrict the actions and limit the options of states. Or it can create an existential threat, security threat, which compels states to expend money, men, and material to acquire distant, inhospitable terrain. To the participants in the new great game, the US, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, India, and China, Afghanistan is all three. So, 104, I thank you for your time. Apologize that I went a little over the hour. I look forward to any of your questions.
Wonderful. And as our guests enter their questions in the chat box at the lower portion of the screen, I'd like to throw in a few that have already come in. Carl Prinsloo, the CKC director, writes in and asks, once the U.S. withdraws its military forces, do you anticipate the U.S. to have similar influence in Afghan government or with Pakistan? And if so, why or by what means or not?
It depends on what government actually takes form after the U.S. leaves. I think that the attempt to build a Taliban or include members or parts of the Taliban in is going to be indicative of what type of influence the U.S. does have. Historically, from the 1930s, what you had was the King Zahir Shah, and especially his cousin who overthrew him, President Daoud, played the U.S. and the Soviet Union off. in the sense of offering them economic opportunities and political opportunities to present their positions within the country. That's been the history of the governments usually, not to be tied to one power. I'm thinking that if that is reliable, that the government of Afghanistan is going to try to, after the U.S. leaves, if the fighting is ended, if there is some type of reconciliation, to try to have a neutral position, U.S. having influence, but not necessarily a significant influence as of what it has now.
Okay, kind of going back to the beginning of your presentation, talking about Mackinder, what motivated him to propose this Heartland theory? That seems kind of central.
Yeah, there were two theories of what makes a country great: the sea power and land power. And countries like the British and the Americans relied on sea power. And at this time, the articulate, the person who was the greatest articulator of it was Alfred Thayer Mahan, captain, taught at the U.S. Naval War College. And he wrote The Influence of Sea Power on History. And he looked and he said, if there was a country that could have domination of the sea, and be able to project its power by having control just of strategic points, choke points, canals, coaling stations, that it could ensure its economic development. You know, he was supporting the spread of free trade and the spread of American business overseas, that by having the bases in the Pacific, and he called for the annexation of Hawaii, and bases in the Caribbean, the U.S. could be able to exert power to preserve its economic interests without actually controlling directly, with the exception of Hawaii, those lands. They would be under U.S. influence, but not necessarily directly U.S. control. The importance of his power seemed to be borne out at the end of World War I, where an important factor in Germany's defeat was the embargo, food embargo that the British put on, and being the preeminent sea power could maintain. So some people thought that while there were flaws in Mahan's theory, that how the British Navy imposed the embargo at towards the last months of the World War I justified it. But you had the history that Mackinder was also aware of the great game between Russia and the British for Central Asia, Iran, and Afghanistan. And so he proposed that a country such as Russia, who didn't have a naval power comparable to the British, any such power still had the possibility of becoming a world power through land, and concentrating not on the Navy, but on the Army, and concentrating on acquiring and ruling directly this territory because of its strategic location, because of its resources. Now, when World War II, in the early stages, this was adopted by a variation by the Nazis, and having an alliance with Soviet Union and Japan. And through having this land mass, be able to defeat the efficiency of the British Navy, because there would be too much land and too many ports for the Navy to try to cover, and there would be unobstructed land routes of oil, whether it's from Azerbaijan or Romania, food, whether it's from South Russia or Ukraine, that would be available to Germany, so it would not be a repeat of World War I. So in the case of Mackinder, it was just taking the opposite view that was prevalent on land power, of sea power, and saying to those countries that don't have a navy, you have the option of land power. And just the way he drew his map, while he's not naming it in the paragraphs that I quote, even though he's British, he seems to be pointing out Russia as the power. It had part of Eastern Europe at the time and much of Eurasia, and that border of Russia was listed as his heartland for his theory. So it was just intellectual debate on what is the most efficient way a country could maximize its political and economic power. And basically they were calling for empires. How could they do it? One argued by sea, he said it could be done contrarily by land.
Okay, and because we're short on time, let me kind of paraphrase another question here. You talk about the Pakistan sphere of influence. Do you see that the U.S. being able to free itself from the dependency on China for rare earth minerals? Do U.S. mining companies currently have access or solid business relations in the area?
At this point, I don't know. I can't answer if they actually have anything more than plans on paper. The area is not able to be exploited in any commercial fashion at this point because of the insurgency, because of the condition of the terrain where there's not actual battle going on. So the idea that one would be able to become less dependent on China. I know Foreign Policy and Wall Street Journal had talked about market manipulation by China for its own needs on its selling of the rare earth metals several years back. This would free the U.S., weaken China, but it's not viable at this time. So I don't know of any commercially relevant operations going on, just plans based on that hyperspectral mapping.
Well, and as China seems to be the kind of the focus for as we pull back a little bit, what do you see as any sort of inherent weakness in the Chinese geopolitical position regarding the Afghanistan surrounding areas?
It's basically more an internal position. It has this fast-growing economy, and yet it has been reliant as its principal economic engine, the South Coast. It is trying to diversify. It has plans about what to do with the North and Manchuria in the West, but it has been dependent on that area just in the South Coast opposite Taiwan. That area, if there is an economic problem, in my opinion, China watched what happened with the reforms of Gorbachev and drew one lesson. There can't be a democratization as we talk about it, multi-parties. The Chinese Communist Party has to retain power, because if it didn't, once the Soviet Union broke apart, once it lost the outlying regions, Transcaucasia, Central Asia, the historic Russia itself broke apart into three countries, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. And it would appear to me, anyway, I would propose that China is concerned that if it lost Tibet and Xinjiang, Western China, which is Muslim, the Uyghurs, that it would not have defensible boundaries, first off, and second off, that it too would break apart into a North and a South China. Now, there has not been a North and a South China since the 11th century, but for centuries before that, from like 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, there were two separate or more countries in the South and in the North. The South speaks languages that are mutually unintelligible to the North, which speaks Mandarin. And there are cultural differences, agricultural differences, and the knowledge. In fact, geographical separations. They differ as to which river is the actual border between North and South. But if there was a crisis economically in China, the minority issue had always been thought of 6% of the non-Chinese. The Tibetans, the Uyghurs, the Mongols, the Manchus, the Zhuang, the tribals. But there is this history of independence. There is this distinct language and identity. And it's the weakness is that the minority issue is not recognizing that the South Chinese can be viewed as a separate ethnic group from the North. And in hard times, that's the power engine. That could break away and be its own country. It has the economic ability. It's been the most developed. So China right now is doing very well with regard to the conditions it's been placed. And it has apparently, from what I've shown, checkmated any aspirations of India for the time being. But it has that one internal weakness. If the economic issue and the minority issue comes colliding with the South Chinese, that China could go the way of the Soviet Union with the independence of Tibet and Xinjiang and the breakup of China into two states as Russia broke up into three.
But that kind of breakup is kind of the thought of what we're doing as we talking about the shifting of geopolitics and the resources involved. We've covered a lot of ground. Is there one big thought that you'd like everybody to take away from this?
Central Asia now is still occupying that road in a modern way that it always has, and that is Afghanistan is southern Central Asia, the southern steppe. So I refer Central Asia, I include Afghanistan. That has been the part of the Silk Road in ancient times, and instead of the Silk Road we have the pipelines. History just continues. The geography is an important factor, and it doesn't change, not dramatically in our lifetimes. And that's the important thing. Central Asia still has a relevance to east and west, just with pipelines and not with caravans.